Greetings, my friends. My name is Ivan Goncharenko. I'm guide in Slovenia, and today we're going to do a short tour of Ljubljana. We're now on Prešeren Square, which is considered to be central square of the city. Once, long ago, there was a market area over here. On my left-hand side, there is a bridge. Behind this bridge, there was city wall and the gates, and the old town was over there. So at the entrance, there was this market area. Nowadays, it's quite a busy place, especially on holidays, which are upcoming now. And over here we have a few monuments and quite interesting buildings, partly coming from 17th, 18th centuries, partly those are more modern, of course. The oldest building we have here is behind me on the right. It is Franciscan Monastery with a red facade. Franciscan Monastery partly comes from 17th and 18th centuries. Besides the monastery, there is of course a church of Assumption of Saint Mary. The monastery and the church are open for visitors. They only have a little bit of a fee to enter the church. Also, there is a huge library which is open for visitors from time to time. Also, behind me you can see a monument to the most famous Slovenian poet, Franz the Prešeren. He's the poet of first half of 19th century. He was probably the most prominent poet in Slovenia. First half of 19th century gave each of the nations their famous poets. So there was Byron in Great Britain, there was Goethe in Germany, there was Pushkin in Russia, and there was Prešeren over here in Slovenia. He is also the author of Slovenian national anthem. It is named Zdravljica. Zdravljica means a toast, and actually the poem is about drinking wine, having a good time, but of course they took another part of this poem about mainly being in good relations with friends and neighbors, and now Zdravljica is the national anthem of Slovenia. Three bridges, or tromostovi in Slovenia. Three bridges is one of the landmarks of Ljubljana. Originally there was one bridge. It used to be named Hospital Bridge, and this bridge used to connect this part of the city with the old town on the other side of Ljubljana river. There was a hospital from another side. This is why it got its name once, Hospital Bridge. But by the beginning of 20th century, the bridge was not enough. There was heavy traffic. There were automobiles, there were vehicles, there were horses, tram, pedestrians, and they were going to remove the old bridge completely and build a wider and bigger one on the same spot. But the prominent Slovenian architect, whose name was Jože Plečnik, his heritage, by the way, is now part of UNESCO World Heritage here, came up with an idea of building two extra pedestrian bridges on two sides of the main bridge, and thus creating one of the landmarks of Slovenia, three bridges. We are now on so-called Butcher's Bridge. Originally, there was an idea of architect Jože Plečnik to build a bridge over here to connect two sides of Ljubljana river. But during the times of, due to World War II and the events over here back then, the bridge was not completed at that period of time. So now the bridge is more modern, and we have a few sculptures over here which are created by an architect and artist, Slovenian artist. They represent a few gods and characters from Bible and Greek mythology. For instance, from this side we have a statue of Prometheus, who gave fire to the people. On the other side of the bridge, behind poplar trees, there are two statues of Adam and Eve, and behind me there is a statue of Satyr, one of the gods of Greek mythology. One more interesting but very small sculpture is located right over here on the bridge, and these are a few frogs. There are two reasons for the frogs to actually be here. First reason is that frog legs is one of the dishes which you can find in some restaurants in Ljubljana. The thing is that next to the city there is a huge area which is named Ljubljana Marshes. There are big wetlands where once there was a lake. And for the local people, let's say frogs were easy to catch food. Another reason is that in Slovenian language there is a word kaj, which means what. What is this? But people in some areas around Ljubljana pronounce this like quoi, in French manner, quoi, 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 like the sound of a frog. So let's say residents from other areas of Slovenia sometimes name Ljubljana citizens frogs. So here are a few frogs. One more interesting spot on a tourist map of Slovenia is the bridge which you can see behind me. It is named Dragon Bridge, Zmajski most. The bridge was originally named Anniversary Bridge, and there are dates 1848, 1888, which resemble the dates of rule of Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph I. Actually, the bridge once was wooden, then was replaced with a stone one, and eventually there was built a concrete bridge. In 1895, in Ljubljana, we had a very devastating earthquake which destroyed about 10% of all the buildings and constructions in the city. After that earthquake, Ljubljana was completely renovated in a new Art Nouveau or Vienna Secession or modern style. And this building, this construction of the bridge was the first to be built here in this Vienna Secession style. It was also covered with first 30 meters of asphalt, which was very, very fancy for that period of time. In a few years, a few statues of dragons appeared on the bridge. It was in 1905, and the statues were made in Vienna. Since that time, the bridge got its name, Dragon Bridge. There is a number of stories and legends here in Ljubljana which tell us about dragons, stories about dragons, and so on. Probably the most known legend is the one about Jason and the Argonauts. It's actually an ancient Greek legend which states that once long ago an ancient Greek hero named Jason was sent to the place which was named Colchida or Colchidos. We suppose it's Georgia in Caucasus nowadays, to find their golden fleece, an ancient treasure. It was found over there, and Jason has basically stolen this golden fleece from one of the local kings and went back to Greece. But the way through Bosporus directly to Mediterranean Sea was closed for them, so they had to use Danube River. They went up Danube River from Danube to Sava, from Sava to this Ljubljanica, and by Ljubljanica River they went up to a former lake which was once next to Ljubljana. There they had an issue. The thing is, they thought that there is a direct way from this lake to Adriatic Sea, but there was no. So they had to disassemble their vessel, take it by parts to the coastal site of Adriatics and reassembled there again. And of course, it took them time, so they had to stay for the winter next to this lake. And the locals told Jason about a local beast, serpent, dragon, which terrorized the area. So Jason defeated the dragon, killed the dragon, and became a legendary person to establish Ljubljana. And their houses became the first houses of the city. So in the original version of this legend, this dragon was a terrorizing beast. But with time, the locals decided that it's a good idea to have a dragon as a protector. And starting from approximately 14th, 15th century, we have a dragon on the coat of arms of Ljubljana. So behind me, you can see one of landmarks of the old part of Ljubljana, which is a fountain named Fountain of Three Carniolan Rivers, or Roba Fountain, by the name of the artist who created it. Francesco Roba was actually a Venetian artist who came here to Ljubljana in the middle of 18th century. We suppose he couldn't find a job in Venice, so he came here and was commissioned to work in a few churches and monasteries, and he was commissioned by the local government to create here a fountain to represent three major rivers of the region: Krka, Ljubljanica and Sava. And the fountain, the original idea of the fountain was to build it completely of white Italian marble, which was brought here by two vessels. But unfortunately, one of the vessels sunk, and they had to use local materials. The materials appear to be quite soft, and by 20th century the fountain was not in the perfect shape, so they decided to put the original fountain into the National Gallery of Slovenia in one of the museums here in Ljubljana, and here we can see a replica nowadays. A little bit further, we can see the cathedral, St. Nicholas Cathedral, which comes from very early 18th century. Before this cathedral, there was a church which was built in 13th century and named after the patron saint of sailors and fishermen over here, Saint Nicholas. Later, in early 18th century, it was replaced by a Baroque cathedral, which is considered to be one of the best preserved and one of the best masterpieces of Baroque period of time here in Ljubljana. You can visit the cathedral. We are now next to Ljubljana Cathedral of St. Nicholas. There are two main entrances, one from the side of the square of Cyril and Method, and one from the side of Bishop's Palace. This entrance is almost always closed, but we have here a very interesting door which actually tells us the story of Christian history of Slovenia, starting with the 7th century when the first Slavic people came here. Actually, they came here with the tribes of Avars, but these Avars, nomadic tribes which came from the east, completely disappeared in history, mixing with other people, when the Slavic people managed to preserve their culture and language, peculiarities and so on. It tells us the story of medieval period of time with the crusaders following the valleys of the Alps in this region. It tells us the story of the Turks, which used to have their raids over here till 17th century. It tells us about the priests which used to start to use Slovenian language during the times of Reformation in 16th century, and of course it tells us about the history of 20th century with the wars and turbulence and the appearance of new country of Slovenia in year 1991 with Pope John Paul II overlooking all of this history from above. The door was created in 1996 when John Paul II came here to visit Slovenia. By the way, next to Cathedral there is one more building which is Bishop's Palace. And this Bishop's Palace was one of the buildings which they started to build just after a very devastating earthquake in year 1511. It was not only Bishop's Palace through the centuries, but also a kind of a guest house for noble visitors. For instance, Austrian emperors a few times used to stay over here in this Bishop's Palace. Besides that, Napoleon Bonaparte in 1797 and Russian Emperor Alexander I during the time of Laibach or Ljubljana Congress in 1821. We are now on the city square, Mestny Trg, and behind me you can see town or city hall, Rotolš, which originally the city hall here appeared in 14th century. Later it was moved to the spot where it is now. Has been renovated through a few times through the history. Here in Ljubljana we have very old history of elections of a mayor. The first elections took part in early 16th century, and since that period of time there are more than 140 mayors changed. Mayor's office is still here. You can also see 3 flags above the entrance. 3 flags represents the flag of Slovenia, flag of European Union and flag of Ljubljana. City Hall is located in the old part of the city, which we usually name Baroque Ljubljana. Baroque is a period of time in history, architecture and arts which is mainly 17th and 18th centuries. That period of time with specific architecture and quite a lot of buildings which you can see behind me come from 18th century. That is the period of time when the city still had city walls, which means that there was a lack of space inside the city, and the streets of old city are very narrow. It is quite typical for many cities across Europe, Central, Eastern, and not only Europe to have streets of this size. It was very common. So the city walls usually were built in 13th and 14th century to defend the cities, the settlements against first of all Mongols and later Turks. When the threat was gone, at the end of 17th century, they started to demolish the walls and the streets started to become wider and more comfortable. But earlier, the streets used to look like this, and they were used also as ventilation corridors, because lack of space was one of the huge issues, and one of the consequences of the lack of space was the fact that the houses used to stand very close to each other. This is why the cities usually suffered from fires. you can see one of the bridges across Ljubljana River. The name of this bridge is Shoemakers or Cobbler's Bridge. It was built by architect Jože Plečnik in early 1930s. The lights on the bridge resembles Triglav mountain, three peaks on Triglav, national symbol of Slovenia. Down below we have the river. The river's name is Ljubljana. Ljubljana arguably is the river which gave its name to the city of Ljubljana. Sometimes we name it a river of seven names. It appears in the cross region with the name of Pivka and disappears in one of them, probably the most known caves in Slovenia, which is Postojna cave. Then appears on the surface again, disappears in another cave, and do this 7 times, each time changing the name. And finally it comes here with Ljubljana as a name. By the way, it's a tributary of Sava. Sava is tributary of Danube, and Danube brings all of this water into the Black Sea. So here, behind me, you can see one more interesting building which was created by architect Jože Plečnik. This one is National and University Library of Slovenia. Actually, the first library appeared here long ago in 18th century. This building was created in 1930s by architect Jože Plečnik. It wasn't affected by later events, years, even though during the time of World War II a light airplane crashed into this building. It was completely renovated later. Inside, from this side, we have the entrance, and when you enter this building you have a very heavy door. You have to push it because your way to the knowledge is not easy. When you enter the building, you find yourself in a dark corridor with a staircase going up. And while you are ascending the staircase, it gets lighter. And when you are in reading room, it's full of light. It's your way from ignorance to enlightenment. In this building, well, actually not only in this one, but in the storages of National and University Library of Slovenia, we have at least one example of each book ever printed in Slovenian language. So behind me, you can see a place which is named Križanke. Actually, once this used to be a monastery of German order. Actually, the Knights of German Order came here quite long ago, and they used to own big portions of land on the territory of modern-day Slovenia. Later, the monastery became abandoned, and by the time of World War II, after the time of World War II, during the socialist period of time, they decided to recycle this former monastery into a venue for different kinds of events, musical, theatrical, and of course, first of all, so-called Ljubljana Festival, which take part over here in Ljubljana for more than 70 years already. Nowadays, the venue is open for visitors, and you can have a look inside and see a kind of a fusion of a monastery and a socialist symbols. From another side, we can see the City Museum of Ljubljana, which is located in so-called Auersperg Palace. The Auerspergs used to be a noble family which used to own, again, quite a portion of land in the modern-day Ljubljana. And they used to own the castle at top of the hill, and this one palace, either which they used mainly to live in winter period of time. Nowadays, inside this palace, we have a city museum of Ljubljana with an interesting exhibition which includes, for instance, world's oldest wooden wheel with an axis which is 4200 years old and which was found on Ljubljana marshes. We are now on so-called French Revolution Square, and behind me we can see a monument which is dedicated to Napoleon Bonaparte, which is quite unusual because in Europe, outside of France, you'll find only two monuments dedicated to this person, one in Poland, another one over here in Slovenia. The reason is that in the beginning of 19th century there was a period of time when, after the war, one of the wars of France and Austria was defeated, and on some part of the territory which was under Austrian control, a new country was established. It was actually a puppet state of France, and it was named Illyrian provinces, with the capital over here in Ljubljana, in Ljubljana. And it didn't last long, only 4 years, but it was a period of time when, for instance, Slovenian language became official language over here, and there was a period of time when people here got education in English. It was, in Slovenian language, of course. It was a period of time when the Slovenian culture started to rise, and for Slovenians that 4 years are very important in their culture, in their history, because, for instance, before that, for centuries, and after that, till 1918 and the collapse of Austrian Empire, the official language always was German. We are now on the square which is named Congress Square. It was created by the year 1821, when here in Ljubljana, that time named Laibach, there was a congress of the countries of Holy Alliance. This was the guys who defeated Napoleon Bonaparte, and there were a few meetings after the defeat of Napoleon, which took in a few cities across Europe. The most significant was in 1815 in Vienna, but after that there were a few others, and one of them took part over here in Ljubljana Congress, or Laibach Congress. And this square was created for the events of this Congress. Nowadays, we have a few buildings around the square which come from later periods of time. Of course, on my left-hand side, we have Ljubljana University. Ljubljana University is now ranked among 3% of best universities in the world. There is a number of faculties around the city, and Ljubljana is quite a student city, of course. The building itself was built in the very early 20th century. Back then, it used to be the government of the county of Carniola as a part of Austrian Empire. Behind me, we can see Ljubljana, Slovenia Philharmonic, with the date over there on that yellow building 1701, which is the date when the Philharmonic itself was created. The building actually comes from much later period of time. Above, we can of course see the castle, Ljubljana Castle, which now houses a museum, a few restaurants, viewpoints of course, and one of the best views of the city you can find over there atop of this castle. From this side, we can see a small park area, which is named Zvezda Park or Star Park, and it is about the lakes over there and the shape of these lakes. There is also a small monument, an anchor behind me. Anchor represents the event that after World War II, Slovenia gained coastal side back, because between World War I and World War II, the coastal side of modern day Slovenia used to be a part of Italy. And finally, from this side, we can notice a monastery, former Ursuline monastery, behind which we also can see a few buildings which come from socialist period of time. It's a little bit another part of Ljubljana, but with its own history and its own soul.